And I'm thinking, what is going on? And I didn't know what was happening, so I invited him in, like, hey, Michael, what are you doing? And he just started talking about how he felt after we fought each other, he just kept having this idea that he needed to come over and talk to me. And I didn't want anything to do with what he was about to say, because I had a feeling that he was gonna, say something about what I didn't want to hear, which was about what he was holding, which was scriptures in his hand. And he shared his testimony with me, and I was 18 at the time, and it really, really made an impact on me, because then I started thinking about it, and I started just thinking, okay, I know that I have to finally see if this is real. I've always believed in God. I always knew, but I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to know. And so I took his challenge and I prayed about it, and my life changed dramatically, because I finally understood what it was like to receive a direct answer at the exact moment. And that's kind of where that's when it started. Like, that's when everything kind of started, and my eyes started to become a little bit more open. And so I went to my bishop, who I had never talked to about any of this stuff, and I said, hey, this happened. And then I started to prepare to go on a mission for my church. And it took about a year to get prepared, and I was really excited to go. And I had my farewell. It was such an amazing day. And I got out into the field, and something happened that was very, very difficult for me. I fell into a massive depression. And I don't know if you've ever had that, if you've ever experienced anything like that, but I was crying every 10, 15 minutes, just bawling. And so then I don't know if they call it AP, they came to, talk to me, and they were like, what did you do, Elder? I didn't do anything. You had to have done something. I didn't do anything. It took me a year. Long story short, I ended up coming home from my mission early from depression. And this was right after I just was in a farewell. So now all of a sudden you're home, right? And it was so hard for me, because I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to face anybody. And so I just hid in my basement for months, because I didn't want to see anybody. I couldn't picture myself doing anything. And one day I was on my computer, and I come across this. Do you remember is Yahoo still a thing, by the way? Yahoo? Anyway, so Yahoo. I was on this thing called Yahoo, and it was a karaoke chat room. Karaoke chat room online, and it was country music. And it was awful. Like, these people were singing through this thing, just awful. Just, and I'm just laughing. And they get down to my name, and my little username was Mr. E Guy. Mr. E Guy 81, because that's, there's a year I was born, 81. And they said, it's your turn. And I said in the microphone, I said, pass, because I didn't know how to sing. And so then I started to practice a Garth Brooks song over and over and over and over and over. So then the next day they got down to my name, Mr. E Guy, it's your turn. So then I sing this song, and all of a sudden the little emojis are coming up, like clapping and cheering, like, yeah, you're good, you're good. And so then the next person came up, and they said, I want Mr. E Guy to sing my song. So then I was like, oh my gosh. So then I just sang the same song again, because I didn't know what else to sing, so I did it again, and they were still clapping. And so music, that lit a whole new fire in me. So then I started to go to karaoke bars up in Salt Lake, right? So I was telling my dad, I'm like, hey, I'm singing this thing, do you want to come to this at a bar? Yeah. And so I'd go to these karaoke things, and I ended up winning this contest, this karaoke contest. And that like fired me up. I was all excited about it. And I'd never sang before. And then I entered into a contest called Nashville Star. Has anyone ever heard of that? It's like a really ghetto version of American Idol, like, redneck. And a guy named Buddy Jewell won it that year, but I made it to the regional finals of that. And I called my dad, and my dad was in this class. He announced it to his class, and it perked this girl's attention. She happened to know this guy in the music business, and I didn't know who it was at the time. But it was a man who I used to watch when we were growing up boxing. It was a man named Evander Holyfield that got his ear bit up by Mike Tyson, the only 4-time heavyweight champ of the world. So I get this phone call, and it's this guy with this, deep voice from like Georgia. And this is Evander Holyfield. I heard you do stand, and I'm like, this has got to be a joke. This is a joke. There's no way. Well, he happened to have a record label, and he's like, I haven't heard you, but I got a good feeling about you. That's what he said. And he's like, I want to hear you. So he was going to fly me out to his house in Georgia, and I'm like, well, can my little brother come? He's like, sure. So we fly out to Georgia, and I'm thinking the whole time, there's no way this is happening, because he was my idol, like Evander Holyfield. Did anyone watch Holyfield fight? I mean, this is the warrior, right? I mean, this is the real deal, Holyfield. And so I thought for sure I would get there, and it was going to be like this little black guy that's like, yeah, my name's Holyfield too. Nope, it was him. And I barely knew the guitar. I mean, just a couple chords, because I was practicing the song, because I knew I had to do this audition. So I knew like 3 chords, and and so now I'm sitting there in Evander Holyfield's basement in this 54,000 square foot mansion in Georgia. He's like, all right, go ahead. And so I get out my guitar and I sing like one verse, part of one chorus, and he stands up, and he kind of smiles and stands up, and I like stop, and I'm like, so what'd you think, And he says, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to put you on my record label. And so now all of a sudden I'm on this record label, and I don't even know how to play the guitar. But he said, he's like, you remind me of me. And I just started talking to him about it. And I know, the reason why I tell this story is because God sometimes will put people in your life to help you pull out of stuff, And I believe that we're answers to each other's prayer. And he helped me so much in my life. And this is a black man, and he started telling me about how when he was younger, when he was 8 years old, there was a white boxing coach in the projects that came to him, and he pointed at Evander and he said, you're going to be the heavyweight champion of the world one day, when he was 8. And he helped him. And so I was the only white person on his record label, but we just became best friends, and every day he still texts me every morning for however many years, he texts me scriptures. And so I thought I was going to be a country singer. So I'm up in Salt Lake now, and I'm single at the time, and I'm at a country swing dance. And I don't know how to dance, I just went there to pick up girls, And I see this girl, and, well, Stacy. And I told, I think I was with my brother at the time, and I just looked at her and I said, I love her, I love her, I love her. I'm gonna marry that girl. And then she dogged me 3 times. But then we ended up going out. And so, as I was pursuing this country music career, we met with a man named Mike Borchetta, who found Tim McGraw. And I played him my song, and he said, and I don't know if he was just blowing smoke or what, but he said, I've said this 2 times in my career. He said, I said it with Tim McGraw, and I've said it with Leanne Rimes. He looked at me and said, you're a star. That's what he said to me. And so I remember just thinking like, oh my gosh, this is my chance, this is my chance. And so we had our first daughter, and every time I'm going back and forth to Nashville, I just had this feeling inside of me. It just didn't sit right. It never sat right with me. And it was, right when that movie, Walk the Line. Has anyone seen that movie, Walk the Line, with Johnny Cash? It was when that came out, and his whole life was a disaster. And so we're watching this, and my wife's crying, and I'm like, yeah, this is awesome, Walk the Line of country music, And so my daughter's first birthday was coming up in December, and they wanted me to do this radio tour, and it was my daughter's, it was literally her first birthday. I said, hey Mike, I can't do it because it's my daughter's first birthday. And he says, oh, I don't think you understand what this is gonna take. And I just knew in my heart, like I've been fighting it the whole time, like, because in the music world, it is a nasty world, you know? And very, very few families stay together in that. And I just had this feeling like, so I told Mike, I said, maybe I don't. And I didn't know what I was gonna do, but I stopped pursuing music, and I did this ride-along with a guy in my ward who was on the gang unit and the SWAT team for the Salt Lake City Police Department. And he said, hey, you should come out with me on this ride-along. And so I go out on this ride-along, and it was one of the funnest nights of my whole life. It was like so action-packed, you know, like they gave me a bulletproof vest, and I thought I was so cool. You know, like we did like these bar checks. There was a man with a knife call, and I've got the bulletproof vest, and I'm like, you know, thinking I'm a cop to everyone. And I came home and I said, sweetie, I loved it. Like I loved it. And she said, you'd be a good cop. And so then I started to study, and I started to go to school to learn the law, because I guess, you know, you have to know the law in order to enforce it. Not the Constitution, but, you know. And so I remember the first class, one of the first classes I had at the Salt Lake Community College, there was a man named Chief Randy Johnson, and he was the chief of the Granite School District Police at the time. And he came and did an introduction. We hadn't been hired yet, but there was probably 25 of us, and he asked the question, he says, who do you work for? And a couple people raised their hand. One person said, well, we work for the city. Well, we work for the community. And somebody said, well, we work for you. And he just rolled his eyes. And he said, he just stared at everybody. And he said, I want you to never forget this. He said, you work for God. Never forget it. And I remember it. Yeah. And I remember just getting chills. Like, I just remember getting chills. Like, this is awesome. Like, I felt like it was a calling. And so I got hired with the Salt Lake City Police Department. And it was amazing. Like, the first little bit, it was just hard charging. Go, 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 go. Like, call to call to call to call. You know, for my ADD brain, it was perfect. Because, you know, you can't get enough. It's just going, 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 going. Like adrenaline, you know. And everything was about numbers, right? So how many former just law enforcement in here? Anybody former law enforcement? Okay. So I don't know if it was just numbers for you guys, but in order to judge a law enforcement officer in most departments, they look at your stats. Well, how good is he? Let's look at his stats. How many arrests does he have? How many citations has he written? Because what else are you going to look at? So as a newcomer, as a new guy, you want to be a hard charger, you know. And so they started saying things like, "Hey, the first person to get a yellow Toyota gets an hour off." Oh, yeah, I can get a yellow Toyota. And so we start going for the yellow Toyota to see if we can find a violation of the yellow Toyota to get an hour off, right? Seems a little problematic, right?
If you have a yellow Toyota.
He said if you have a yellow Toyota. And then they'd say things like, well, the first person to, you know, write X amount of tickets gets this. And the first person to, you know how they have these little kids with the food carts, you know, like they go around and they sell corn, like in Rose Park, these little Hispanic kids that are selling corn. First person to ticket one of those guys. And I would always go find them. And I would always feel like there was just something about it. Like, well, okay, I got it and I won. I'd send the sergeant a message, I got him. And I'll get to that in a second, like why that's very problematic. But I remember in training, in training you have this kind of book, you know, like this really thick book of all the calls that you have to go on or at least talk about in order to pass to become a cop, because you're just an FTO, like a field training officer. You haven't quite graduated, but you're with another cop. And so we hadn't done an impound yet, right? Just an impound of a car. So we're going through it, I'm seeing what to do, and I pull over this car and and it's a mom, and there's about, I don't know, 3 or 4 car seats. And, well, she had a registration that was expired, past, I think, a month. So maybe it was expired a month, so 4 months. And I was like, okay, well, we'll just give her a ticket, because, and my FTO said, no, we're gonna impound it. And so go tell her. I remember thinking like, oh, okay, no big deal, we're just gonna impound the car. And then I told her, we're gonna impound the car. And she's like, well, she starts to cry, naturally. Well, I have all my kids' stuff, and it's just a month, can you give us a break? And I remember going back to my FTO, hey, do you think we can maybe give her a break? And he's just staring at me, and I'm thinking, oh no, like if I say something, and I remember he said like, well, she smokes, so she can afford it. If she can afford cigarettes, she can afford this. I remember just thinking like, this doesn't feel right. And so I ended up impounding her car. And when you make decisions like this, something happens just a little bit, like it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it's just a little bit that you kind of go past your thoughts. So then, in law enforcement, you start to deal with the same people over and over and over, right? The same kind of like 2 to 3% of people that are just violate. So then you kind of start to get a little bit jaded, and you start to see people not really as people. And I remember my first couple years, I was starting to kind of get, my mind wasn't doing too good, because I'd see people and I would always be like, well, what are they doing? And I'd sit in like a corner of a restaurant, and I'd always be in the corner just watching people. Like, not healthy, right? That's not healthy, but that's what happens when you're dealing, in Salt Lake City, that is the worst part of Utah. And so finally, I remember I really was kind of having a really rough time in life. We started to have some marriage problems because of the way that I was treating people. And we came to this, one of my buddies that I was working for on the bicycle unit, or I was working with, there was a couple who came to the homeless shelter because they lost everything. And so they had a van, and they were just trying to park anywhere with them and their kids. So they had 4 kids, 4 car seats. Well, this parking enforcement lady, we get a call, hey, we need help on this call. And so we get there, and the husband is there like, hey, we have nowhere else to park. And she says, I got you, I finally got you. Because she had been going around ticketing that car for so long. Now she had enough tickets to impound the car. And I remember my heart's just beating like, okay, we're just here to, it's none of my business because it's her business, but we're just here so that nothing gets, and this father is just bawling, right? He's just crying like, I will lose everything. Like, if I can't do this, I will lose everything. And so the tow truck gets there, and she's really happy about this find, because I'm sure she has some type of incentive. And as the tow truck is there getting ready to pick this thing up, I wanted to say something so bad. And then all of a sudden I hear my friend said, put it down. And I looked, and he said, this isn't happening. My friend breaks out money, and the tow truck driver's like, well, someone's got to pay for this. He says, I'll pay for it. And so he ends up paying for this to tow, and he's like, we got to find you a spot. Well, this girl starts screaming at us, like, this is out of your league, this is out of your, jurisdiction, da-da-da. So she calls her supervisor. So then my buddy calls his supervisor, or our supervisor, my sergeant. And I rush over to a local hotel, and I'm like, hey, we have this van, we need parked. We need it parked now. And they said, okay, just bring it here. So we rushed over back to the dad, and we said, hey, you need to go park over here so that it's at a private property. And it was amazing because that taught me something. So like, it taught me that you can actually stand up and do the right thing. And I thought we were gonna get in big trouble, but he taught me something that day. And so then somehow I get a hold of some material from Glenn Beck. right? And there was this thing called the GB TV, the Glenn Beck TV. Has anyone heard of that? Before it was the Blaze, it was Glenn Beck TV. So now all of a sudden I'm watching this stuff in my police car, like, what? Like, and they talked about this book called The 5,000 Year Leap. Has anyone read that book, The 5,000 Year Leap? So I'm reading this book, and it's talking about the Constitution, and it's talking about the Founding Fathers, and that they actually believed in God, and that they patterned the Constitution after, Deuteronomy, and all these things that I had no idea about. And it just lit my soul on fire. And I started buying these books and handing them out to cops. And I remember giving it to one of the lieutenants, and he's like, this is a very controversial book. I said, really? Why? It talks about the Constitution. And within a few short months, our sergeant came to us on the bike squad, and he said, okay, we're going to have there's an order now. We're going to have 5 misdemeanor arrests per day. And I remember my heart just dropped because number one, I was already doing that, okay? But something inside of me, that feeling when you just know that you have to say something, but you're afraid to say it? And I just said, hey, Sarge, I don't think that's a good idea. And in police work, it's kind of paramilitary, so you just do not challenge your supervisor. You just don't. And I said, hey, I don't think it's a good idea because what if the citizens knew that we had to arrest 5 people per day? And he just stared at me, right? And so that night, I'm used to, because I'm working the homeless shelter in Pioneer Park, and I said to him, I don't think it's a good idea. So that night, I challenged him, and I turned in 3. So he's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like after our shift, our 10-hour shift, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now everybody's just getting 5, right? So he gets to me, 1, 2, 3. And it was like the moment of all moments. I don't know if you've ever like confronted something and you have to like blur your eyes. Have you ever done this? Like you blur your eyes so that you can't really see the person's face, but you're like looking at them. So I'm like blurring my eyes, like I'm challenging him, but I can't really see him. And he calls me out in the office and he's just screaming. He ordered everyone else home and he said, you're gonna stay another hour and you're gonna arrest 2 more people. I said, no, I'm not. I'm not going to. And so I said, I'll stay here, but I'm not doing it. And so now I'm sitting across at like 2nd South and West Temple, I think it was, or 2nd South, 2nd West, I can't remember. Where I'm at an intersection and he's sitting at the other side of the intersection at 1 a.m. And I'm looking at his car, he's looking at mine, my computer screen's like making my face glow and his is glowing, and it was like, I'm watching him. And he, all of a sudden he gets on the radio an hour later and he said, go home, we'll talk later. And as I was driving home, I just had this feeling like I did the right thing, but I knew there was gonna be problems. And so I got transferred. You usually have like a 3-year, minimum on the bike squad, and I got transferred out early. And all of a sudden I tried to start putting in for different positions and I could not get picked up. And when I was on the bicycle unit, I found, going back, so I need to go back a little bit. So when I was on the bicycle unit, I started to get these really strong impressions about these people, because when you're dealing with the homeless, it's a whole nother world. Because most people that don't realize that a lot of these homeless people, this is the life that they choose. They choose this life. And some of them make a lot of money. Like some of them are in this place called Sunrise Metro, and they have all their housing for free. They've got internet, they've got all like fridges, TVs, and then they come out and they panhandle. And I know this because there would be people just standing there in the road with their sign, and I'm like, just get out of the road, man, because we're getting calls. And I started getting into it with this guy one time, and he's like, I make double what you make. I'm like, come on, man. He's like, I make probably $60,000 in all of my disabilities and everything, and I pull in another $80,000 a year on all this stuff. And I'm just staring there like, like looking at him like, are you kidding me? You know, he wasn't kidding. I'm not saying all homeless people are like that, because there's a lot. It's just massive either drug abuse and alcohol. I mean, where they're literally drinking mouthwash for their drinks. At the dollar store, they'd get $1 and they just drink mouthwash. And I remember this one time, this lady named Peggy. In my book, I think her name is Debbie. Yeah. And she's just a nuisance. Like every time you see, she's just la 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 la, you know. And I'm just like, oh, just please go, like please. And so one night, I think we got called because she was urinating on the sidewalk in front of all these people, and I went off on her. Like I just was like, how do you get to this level? You know, how do you get to this level? And she just breaks down, and she started to tell me about her life. And she started to tell me that, you know, she once had it all. And she was a chef. And she had a family. And then all of a sudden she got a call, and her husband and all of her kids, except for one, died in a car wreck overnight. And she said, I've never been the same. And then she got up. I said, well, you got to go. And I was getting really emotional about it. And she's like, where's my Bible? Where's my Bible? She couldn't find her Bible. She was looking for it because she, you know, carried her Bible around everywhere. I'm like, and I'm thinking like, you don't read your Bible? Come on. And I sent her off, and then I had this thought that I need to get her a set of scriptures. I had this thought that came to my head, like, you get her a set of scriptures. I'm thinking, no, I'm not doing that. Not doing that. And it just kept coming to me. You got to get her a set of scriptures. You got to get her a set of scriptures. And so the next day I went over to the Desert Book, and you know how they get I don't know what it's called, like embossed, because I had her name. So I like looked up her name, what it was, and I think it was like Peggy Tidwell. And I got it embossed on scriptures. So now I'm like looking for it, you know, because I want to give her these scriptures. And I'm like, how are we going to find Peggy, you know? And all of a sudden I hear on the radio, like one of my friends got her somewhere on another call. I'm like, that's Peggy. And so I race over there, and he's, you know, fighting with her, not like physically, but just like, come on, Peggy. And I just have the scriptures, and I come walking up to her, and she's like, oh, what's that? You know, and I bring him out, and I hand it to her, and she looked at it, and she saw her name on it, and she just lost it. And I lost it. She just grabbed me and just hugged me. And that changed my life. Because I started to realize that these people, they are people, you know? And I started to talk about God a lot more, you know, because I was watching Glenn Beck, and I was, you know, he has this man on, David Barton. Has anyone heard of David Barton? And he was talking about President Garfield. And President Garfield was a minister. I don't know if you knew that. But when he was the President of the United States, President Garfield baptized 51 people, or maybe it was 30 people. It was 30 people. He baptized 30 people on a Sunday in the Capitol. And David Barton told me that. And I remember thinking like, yeah, that's what it should be like. And so I started to talk to these people about God a lot more. And so then they started to call our squad, because then we'd go around, you know, and talk about it. And I had like scriptures in my back seat that I'd start handing to people. Not all of them embossed, because that's expensive, but just the little copies. And so they started to call me the preaching cop. Where's the preaching cop? And then I started to make bread. I learned how to make bread. Remember when I used to do that? I'm not nice anymore. And I'd start handing bread out. And that's when I was really born again. And I felt like that's when my mission really started, because I started to actually love people. And I met this guy named Robert one day, and Robert was from the South, and he's a black guy from the South, and he was always drunk at Pioneer Park, always. And one day he wasn't drunk. I said, Robert, what's the occasion, man? Why are you sober? He's like, I know, man. And I said, what brought you to Utah? And this feeling just came, and he said, God told me to come here. And then I had this thought come to my mind, testify to him. And so I started to tell him what I believe about prophets and about how God loves us so much, he's still going to send prophets. And he's going to have scriptures. And so I invited him to go watch this movie at the Main Street in South Temple at a building called the Joseph Smith Building. And it was playing about the prophet Joseph Smith. And he's like, I need a ride. I'm like, all right, get in. So I went and I raced and got my car, because I was on my bike at the time. I raced and got my car. And I drove him up there. And I said, in about an hour, I'll be back. Or about an hour and a half, I'll be back at the same spot. And so I went back and picked him up, and he's just crying. I said, what'd you think? He's like, I loved it. And so I gave him my card, and I hadn't heard anything back from Robert. I hadn't even seen him for months, maybe 6 months. And I was, do you remember where we were at? We were at the park in West Jordan. And I get this phone call, and it was on my off time. I get this phone call, he said, Aaron, this is Robert, remember me? I said, yeah, I remember you, Robert, what's up? And he said, hey, I found your missionaries, I'm getting baptized. And I remember just getting chills, like, he's like, and my mom listened to him too, and she's getting baptized too. And so, Robert, he got baptized and he hasn't been homeless since. And I'm convinced that that's one of the reasons why we're in such a mess as a country, because we don't talk about these things. We don't talk about God. So then, I run into one of the biggest drug dealers in the state of Utah. And his name was Country, his street name, because you have street names, right? His name was Country. Anthony Lane is his real name. And I just watched him, because he was really, he's good at what he does. Like, really, really good at manipulating, and really good at, he's been in the game for a long time. He'd go to jail, come out of jail, and he'd be on top of it all. He'd have dealers for him, and we'd watch him. And one day we just struck up a conversation, and we started talking politics and religion. And I just took a liking to this guy. I was just like, man. And Anthony, I remember I gave him the 5,000-Year Leap. I gave him that book, and he ate it up quick. And so I was like, I had this thought, talk to him about the movie, And so I told him about the movie that I sent Robert to. And this is the #1 drug dealer in Salt Lake. And I thought, okay, no, this isn't good, because Robert's one thing, he's just a drunk, but now we're into felon range, with weapons, and they're holding things. And I said, hey, you want to go to the show? He's like, yeah, let's go. So I put him in my car, against every policy possible. Didn't search him. And so I took my lunch, and I took Anthony to the film in the middle of the day. And so I'm sitting there. Has anyone been to that theater downtown? Yeah. And so we're sitting there, and it's in the middle of the day, so there's nobody there except for me and Anthony. So I'm sitting there like this, and gun side, my gun's over here, and I'm just making sure, okay, everything's fine. If he grabs my taser, I can fight this. And I can hear the radio in my ear, still going, but I went on lunch break. And so we're watching the show. And it came to a part where Prophet Joseph Smith was helping a black man get his horse. Does anyone remember that part of the story? And because he had to sell the horse, so to free him. And so Joseph Smith sold his horse. And it was so moving, and then all of a sudden he said, Anthony. Joseph Smith said the man in the movie's name is Anthony. And his name was Anthony. It just rushed over me, and he starts bawling, I start bawling. And so I had this thought, I need to call my old state president. That was my thought. So I called my old state president. I'm like, look, I've got this is crazy story, but this guy needs help. I know he felt something. I know he's wanting to change. So long story short, we got him up. Well, he said, okay, I'll talk to him. So my wife and I, we get in our minivan, the Momo van, on our off day.
With our 2 children.
That was kind of dangerous. So we go down there and I'm looking for Anthony because we found him a place. And so we pull up and I'm like, I got you a place. And so Anthony jumps in my van and we rush back to Taylorsville. And he meets with my stake president. And so he started taking the missionary lessons. And I don't apologize because I know that there's a lot of people in here that aren't a member of my faith, which is fine. I'm just telling you this because I want to explain what the separation of church and state really means, okay? And it's not what people think. And so then he starts to take the missionary lessons, and they challenge him to get baptized. He said, yeah. He said, okay, well, when are you going to do it? And he set a date, and he said, well, I want my friend to do it. And so I just was like really emotional because it was the very first person that I had ever baptized. And my whole squad went to his baptism, the God Squad. And so since then, like, well, where's he at now? Well, he's back in prison, which is devastating, but he'll call me occasionally. Because, you know, once you get into that drug world, it's like, you know, it's probably 99% you're never getting out. And so I know that he was changed, spiritually speaking. And that changed my life. And so once I got out of the bicycle unit, I couldn't get picked up because I was this insubordinate person, right? But nothing had been on my file. I had never been written up in 7 years. Why? Why do you think it is that I didn't get written up for the quotas? Why? Well, because then it would have record that they have quotas. And so I couldn't get picked up. And so I went and tried out for the motorcycle unit, and I couldn't get picked up. And there was 4 spots open, and 4 of us passed. And it's a hard school. I mean, it's a really hard school because you got to learn how to, like, in a little square box, learn how to turn this motorcycle perfectly. You know, because have you ever seen the cops do like those motorcycle spins? That's hard to do. But within a week, you got to learn how to do it, or you do not pass. So somehow I passed, and I didn't get picked up, but there was 4 spots. And I said, hey, I called the sergeant. Why didn't I get picked up? Well, I guess there's rumor that you're insubordinate. Really? Does this have to do with the quotas? Well, I don't know much about it. And I said, who does it involve? Well, it involves your old sergeant. So I immediately call my old sergeant. And in Utah, you can record. Did you guys know that? It's a one-party recording. So I recorded him. And I said, hey, I guess I'm getting passed up because of what happened with us. And then I was insubordinate, and he starts lighting into me like, all you had to do was 5 arrests a day, and if you go to the motorcycle squad, you're gonna have to do 20. And I'm thinking, what? Like 20? I hadn't heard that. And so I went to the deputy chief, who was over the motorcycle unit and the SWAT team, and I showed him all my stats. I said, look, I'm your number 1 person. I said, the reason why I did this is because if the citizens knew, everybody would get in trouble. And I just stared at him, and there was kind of this like mute comprehension. He just knew that I knew, like, I was gonna challenge him because I was really upset. And so about 2 days later, I get picked up on the motorcycle unit, and I got the call, you're coming up, and I just had this feeling like you just dug your own grave, right? Because day 1, they were on me, like on me. Like ever since the motorcycle unit has been there for years, I mean, probably 100+ years, you drop, does anyone ride motorcycles? Okay, you know how heavy they are. Sometimes you tip them over. They tip over. I tipped mine over, and it happened to do like the Pee Wee Herman, ba-boom, 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 like 3 more bikes. And you get a fine like an actual money fine. And you don't have money for this, but I got fined like $60 that I had to put in the jar of like fines. But then all of a sudden, I get this letter that they're putting a traffic accident on me. I'm like, well, I wasn't moving. So I'm the only officer in the history of Salt Lake City that has a traffic accident for tipping my motorcycle over when it wasn't moving. And I knew something was going on. But when I got in there, they said, all right, well, here's your squad goals. You have 20 a day. And I was like, oh, this is real. So we had to either get 20 tickets a day or we had to do 2 DUIs per night. Because a DUI was worth 10 points. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm just not going to challenge. I'm just going to do my job. I'm going to choose to do DUIs because I believe in it, but I'm going to try to stay away from the tickets. And so I ended up being the very best DUI officer in probably the state of Utah. I had 170 DUIs. Now, when you got a DUI, you would also get an hour off every arrest. So on top of your personal time, on top of your vacation time, you would also get 1 hour off. So I had 170 hours off under the table. Can you see how that might be a problem? Because they incentivize you. Why? People always think, well, Utah, we just passed the laws down to 0.05. Why? Why are we the only state? Because of money. And I started to see how it was a huge money machine. A huge money machine. I mean, 25 bike cops, or 25 motorcycle cops, 25 motorcycle cops times 20 tickets a day, and each ticket's probably $100 and something dollars. I mean, we're talking millions of dollars that's coming into the city from tickets. And so it's a huge machine. And I'm not saying every police department's like that, because there's some properly funded. So when I talk about law enforcement, you have to understand that I support our law enforcement. But I support them when they follow the Constitution and they follow what's right. Because what's happening and what's going to happen across the United States is police officers are going to have to really make some hard decisions, especially when they are talking about our rights and guns. That's going to be coming. And so we have to support the good guys in law enforcement. We have to. And so, anyway, I get an email from one of the sergeants, and it's about the LGBT parade. And they needed 5 officers. And I'm thinking, oh, okay. But then all of a sudden I start reading, and they want us to be participants in this thing, in this parade. They wanted us to lead the gay parade in our uniforms. Do you understand the difference? And so I saw that, and I came into work, and I switched spots with another cop. I said, hey, will you be in the parade, and I'll do your security post? Oh, no problem. So we switched. 1 hour later, so that was at 5 o'clock. 1 hour later, I get an email. There will be no trading positions in or out of this. So 100 years of policy where you can trade spots, as long as you have it covered, has now changed. So I knew that I had to say something because, okay, now I've got to explain myself. So I wrote this email, very diplomatic, not like one of my Facebook posts. It was really nice. And I said, you have to understand that I love all people. I love gay people. There's nobody that I hate. I said, if this was an abortion parade, I would ask not to be in it. And the police should not be involved in any type of speech. We should be there to serve and protect and be neutral. But what's happened is that the left in the United States of America have hijacked these police departments. And they have hijacked the medical world. And they have hijacked our schools. And now they are forcing their religion on the people. That's what's happening. And so now irreligion it's now become the forced state religion. You can't even say anything about it. You can't talk about God. I remember when I was on the motorcycle unit, this guy comes up to me, and they're the ones that brought it up to me. They were talking about God and all these things, and so I started talking about what I believe, and it was kind of a trap. They were kind of trapping me in it. And so the next day, he comes up to me and he's like, hey, some of the guys were a little uncomfortable at what you said. And I said, hold on, you brought it up to me. I was just like, this isn't my fault. And I just had this thought to tell him, I said, what is religion to you? And it's just this conversation that we had. And I can't quote it word for word. But I just said, can you be religious? Can you be religious into pornography? He said, are you saying I'm into porn? I'm like, no. But can you be religious? Can you be religious into sports? And he says, what do you mean? I said, when you guys sit in the motorcycle shed and you talk about women's body parts the way you talk about, aren't you imposing your religion on me? And he just sat there, that's not the same. I said, oh yeah, it is. Oh yeah, it is. And I don't say nothing. I said, so let's make a deal. I said, here's the irony. I said, how many times do you say the Lord's name in vain in the motorcycle shed? And he just sat there. I said, you bring his name up way more than I do. So I'll stop talking about it if you stop. And he was so mad. He was so mad. But I just said, I'll stop talking about him if you stop talking about him. Because we're now to a place in society where literally good is evil and evil is good on every single level. On every single level. That's what's happening. Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump, he takes down ISIS, and Joe Biden takes down Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato. That's where we're at. And it's going fast. I mean, it's literally Babylon eating itself alive. That's what we're watching. We're watching them eat each other alive. There's hells. It's amazing. So once I send the email out to my sergeant, I didn't hear anything for a little bit, and then I got an email back, and it was long, and it was scary. And okay. So I get this email back, and it was long and it was scary, and it basically said, "You will be at this assignment. We do advocate for this group, and you should have no problem with performing in this parade." And my heart was just beating, right? And I told my wife, I was like, this isn't good. This isn't good. And then I get a text message from my deputy chief, the same deputy chief that I went in there and showed my numbers to. Hey, we need to talk to you. And I just knew. And when I was driving my motorcycle in that on a Wednesday, and I just had these thoughts, like, this is the last time you're ever going to be on a motorcycle. So I was trying to get those thoughts out of my head, like, no. They're just going to give me a choice. They're going to give me a choice. I'm either going to stay on the motorcycle squad or go back to patrol. Well, I get there, and they set me down, and they took my badge and my gun for discrimination. And I thought everything turned upside down for me. And I remember just crying, just looking down as they're taking my badge off of my chest and my gun, just bawling, thinking, how am I going to face this? Because when you go on administrative leave, it's like everyone knows. And so I go on administrative leave, I get home, my wife's crying, I'm crying, and my sergeant's crying because he didn't want to. And I told him, do not say anything, because he'd been on 18 years. If he says anything, they're going to take away his retirement. And 2 days after that, I don't know if it's 2 days, all of a sudden I get this article from one of my friends. So now I'm administrative leave. Oh, it was my brother-in-law sent me this article. Salt Lake City police officer refuses gay pride parade. I'm like, oh, look at that, somebody else stood up. And it just hit me, like, this is me. This is me they're talking about. And I'm like, I didn't refuse anything. I just asked to trade assignments. That's all I did. I just asked to do a trade. And that's when our whole lives changed. You know, because now it's the government's saying it. So now they're on the steps of Salt Lake City. We do not tolerate bias or bigotry in the Salt Lake City Police Department. And I knew it was over. And so the next Monday I resigned. And it was one of the hardest things that we've been through, because I knew, some people say, why didn't you just stay? And you don't understand, like, when you get on their list, they might not get you for A or B, but they're gonna get you for Y and Z. Like, you're done. And so I knew I had to get out of there. And so then I started to try to pick up jobs. I was terrified. I lost like 20 pounds. There's so many. If you go to my, let me do this really quick. So if you guys go to, can you guys get out your phones really quick? Because I'm gonna have you text something, because I want to share with you. I want to share with you my book for free, because there's too many stories that I want to share. But if you text the word liberty to 888, I'll say this a few times, 888-210-6260. So 888-210-6260. Text the word liberty to 888-210-6260. I haven't even sent one text message out since I've had this number, so you're not going to get bombarded with anything, but if I have an announcement, you'll get a message back from me that's ericmoutsos.com. If you click my webpage and go to my menu, it'll say the book, and you can sign up and read my book absolutely free. If you have to hold it in hand like I do, you can go to Amazon.
Can you say that number again?
Yeah, it's 888-210-6260, and text the word liberty. Is anyone getting messages back already? Yeah. You're gonna, so when the film Non-Essential is fully out, you're gonna get a text message, so then you can start sharing it with people on that number. Where was I at? Oh, sorry guys. I have really bad ADD. I just asked my wife. Where was I? So, I ended up resigning, and I started doing, I started taking up any job that I could, mowing lawns. I started to paint houses, trying to do anything I could. And I just want to testify this to you, because I'm not telling this story because I'm a victim. Because I'm not a victim. When I look back at that experience back in 2014, and I look back at it now, that was by far the greatest thing that's ever happened to me now, looking back. Because I'm convinced that God, when you go through certain storms, it kind of like, it changes you. It changes you. And my faith in God was so much deeper. It was really hard on our family. Like, I talk to my wife all the time. I'd have her come up, but she gets embarrassed. But it was really hard. It's been really hard. But at the same time, it's been such a blessing, because my faith became so much stronger in God. And I got into sales, right? I couldn't get hired at most places that I wanted to get hired. So I started knocking doors for solar energy. Right, you had one of those guys come up to your house? I'm 35. And the first year I made a lot of money. I mean, one of my first deals, I was like, I made more than in 2 weeks as a cop. I'm like, sweetie, like, can you believe it? You know? And so I'm convinced that God will give you paths, like He'll open doors up and give you gifts to be able to do what you need to do. And I made enough money to be able to do what I'm doing this last year. I don't know if you guys know who's a member of the Utah Business Revival. Okay, a couple. So if you're on Facebook, join the Utah Business Revival. But I created the Utah Business Revival in kind of fighting back against all of this garbage. And we've been doing these big rallies. We had the first Colin Ray concert, first concert in America since COVID. And it was, who went to that concert? Woo! Wasn't that awesome? And so, a lot of times,
Are you going to play the guitar?
oh,
Yes.
she just said, are you going to play the guitar? And I really don't know about that.
Yes.
I brought it, but it's not loud enough. You guys can't hear me, can you? You guys can't hear
We'll
me.
be really quiet.
Yeah, we can't hear it. They can't hear it.
No.
Anyway, so we've been going around the state of Utah doing these big Liberty events. We made a film called Non-Essential, and we started the Utah Business Revival. Then we got invited to Missouri. They started a Missouri Business Revival. Colorado just started one. Idaho's starting one, and they're getting ready to do concerts with Colin Ray in all of these states. Isn't that cool? And so, I gotta wrap it up here, but by the way, we need to have more kids. Like, why is it that like the average age is like 60 at all of these events? We need to get the youth up in here. Stand up, stand up. You're our future. You're our future. You are. Yeah, well, my daughter Rachel, 8 years old, she came to me and she's like, Eric, or not Eric, Dad. Usually people call me Eric. She's like, Dad, how can I be courageous like you? And I just looked at her, I didn't know what I was gonna say. I said, tomorrow, don't wear your mask at school, see what happens. And so, she did. She's like, what am I going to say? I said, just say, no, thank you. And so the next day, she didn't wear a mask. And a lot of teachers, hey, will you put on your mask? No, thank you. And she hasn't worn a mask in like 2 weeks. If I could do math that was above third grade level, I'd be homeschooling, but I can't do it. But I just want to quickly end with my testimony about liberty. God is liberty. The reason why He is the most liberated being in the universe, the freest of all beings, is because He makes good choices. Whatever day He's in, He makes good choices. On the other spectrum, we have the adversary, Satan, who is the most bound in bondage being there is. Why? Every day, he makes really bad choices. Selfishness versus selflessness. And when you have, people think that freedom and liberty are the same thing, and they're not. Freedom plus bad choices equals bondage. And when we allow a government to do what they're doing, we now have bondage. And so as much as we want to blame them, which it is their fault, we have got to take accountability for ourselves. And I truly believe that the way that we take it back is locally, and I need to get involved. I'm guilty of it. But we have to organize, and we have to start talking to people about these things, because if this last presidential election taught us anything, it taught us that not even a man who's probably the greatest fighter since George Washington could do it. Since George Washington. If not even he could do it, ain't nobody gonna. And we do not have a political savior. And that was the witness to me, is that we have got to bring God back into it. Because we are on a path it's gonna be bad. However, I believe that we were sent, and we were talking about this with Ward and Christine and the Palmers. I believe that God sent us down, every single one of us, at this exact time to stand up. And I believe that there really was a war in heaven, and it really was about freedom versus control. And it's the same war that has now spilled onto the earth. And I believe that he sent us down at the exact moment in time to stand up for our rights and to fight for them. And sometimes it doesn't look nice. Sometimes we have to say, hypocrite, to a governor that chooses not to wear a mask and forcing 600,000 kids in a mask, but he's at a party. And we can say, hypocrite. And we can do it with love. And we can take the example of Jesus and say, you're a hypocrite. You're a snake. You're a fool. Because they represent us. But we can do it with love. But we have to use certain language that only that word can explain what's happening. Evil. When we're worried about a virus with a 99.991% survivability rate, and we just look past the idea, not the idea, the fact that 42 million babies have been aborted in the year 2020, and we just look past that fact, we are in a world of hurt. And so my prayer is that as we become vocal and we become louder, especially the men, we need more men voices. And I know it's scary. You're going to get the opposition. As soon as you say something online, you're going to get those the trolls, whatever they are. They're going to come out, your family, your coworkers, and they're going to attack you. But just know that 95% of people that know you are going to believe and be on your side. And when you speak, you're going to give somebody else, you're going to give them the light. Just like these lights up here. We have to be those lights. And we can't just have one. We have to have everybody talking, speaking truth. That's how we take it back. And so, anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. I'm so thankful to be here. And my testimony is that we can have liberty if we make righteous choices. Freedom plus morality equals liberty. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ.